Hey everyone, Mr. P here from the Geeky Guys with Mr. Dave once again, and this is a special episode of Tea Break Podcast.
Thank you, Mr. P. Indeed it is. We're very excited. We've got two guests for you this time. We've got two co-executive producers from the brand new Star Trek show, StarTrekProdigy.
Yep.
And that is co-executive producer Patrick Krebs and co-executive producer and also head writer Aaron Waltke. Patrick has worked on over 200 hours of television across 15 years of his career. Since 2016, has produced over 40 hours of hit television content for children. In 2018, he was nominated for an Emmy Award for his work on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Our second guest, Aaron Waltke, he's an American screenwriter, Emmy-winning, Annie-nominated executive producer and showrunner, probably best known for his work on Guillermo del Toro's Troll Hunters, Tales of Arcadia. Welcome, Patrick and Aaron.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, absolutely.
Predominantly, of course, we're here to talk about StarTrekProdigy, which has it's been out a little while in different places, but Paramount Plus has just launched here in the UK as well.
Yes,
so,
very exciting.
Very exciting. Very exciting that you guys can finally get your hands on Prodigy.
I know.
Finally watch it.
It's been obviously in the ether for some time in the UK. Is it, when's it coming? When's it not? And the whole, the launch of Paramount Plus was sort of when's it coming? When's it not? Because obviously, Strange New Worlds, we really wanted to watch that as well. So
it's good.
Finally we've got
Very
it, Dave.
But we did have the introduction to the first episode of Prodigy. We want to mention here at Destination Star Trek Europe, didn't we? At the XL, they showed the first episode of Prodigy in the evening, didn't they?
They did.
The UK
yes.
fans got a bit of a glimpse of the series, didn't they?
A teaser.
The
yes.
series. Yeah, I got to watch the first episode, and then, as we said, it came on Sky, and obviously now it's we've got Paramount Plus over in UK and Europe, and got all the Star Trek shows at our fingertips now, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah, isn't that fabulous? For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you too can subscribe to Paramount Plus and have access to every Star Trek ever made.
Well, it's nice because all of the Star Trek is up there.
I think
all the new shows, all the movies, all the old shows.
I think the only ones that aren't up there is Picard. I assume Amazon has a deal to do the 3 series
for so long.
I guess, but I
They'll
assume
once
that's expired. Let's be honest, that's going to be brought back to there. It's bound to. And
of course they're doing their own shows as well. Obviously, Halo is on Paramount Plus as well. So there's a lot of non-Star Trek content on there as well. So hopefully we might get people subscribed to it that aren't massively into all of Star Trek, but once they've got that, they'll get into it a lot more.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Paramount library. People don't necessarily remember. Like Paramount Studios is as old as any of the other ones. They have so many incredible movies that are just at their fingertips, both classic movies and IP that they can create new content on.
Yeah, exactly.
My favorite show on there, besides the Star Trek content, obviously, is a show called The Offer that is about the making of The Godfather. Which even if you're not like a super Godfather fan, it's just a really fascinating sort of like larger than life sort of deep dive into how film and television is made.
Cool.
Aaron, based on your recommendation, I just binge watched the whole thing yesterday.
Isn't it great? It's like
it's really good. Because it's about making The Godfather, but it's really about how like the studios operated and like the business of like making movies back in that era, and like I thought it was really fascinating.
Yeah,
it's really cool. Like they name what was on the slate when they were making Godfather. Like they were also making Chinatown. They were also making these other movies that I love, and I was like, I didn't even realize those were Paramount movies.
I like the fact that you guys who are kind of in the business still like to watch the documentaries about what happens behind the scenes, because as ordinary people like us, I love that kind of thing, looking behind the scenes at how things was done and the politics involved in bringing something from an idea in your mind to the screen. And
Well, as
That's
someone
part
who
of what
works
we do.
as someone who works in the industry, it's always helpful because nobody over here actually knows what we're doing. So we kind of just look at what everyone else does, tries to emulate that, and hope no one finds us out.
I mean, that's the kind of pattern of behavior that like gets you into the industry. I mean, I remember like being in high school and trying to seek out all of the different, you know, like any periodical, any book that mentioned any behind the scenes thing or technique. I want to know how the magician does the trick.
Yeah.
You know, and so all of that information was just fascinating to me, and I would watch it over and over and over and over again. So it's like that doesn't go away once you start doing it. You just, you know, like you watch people talk about what they're working on in symposiums, and you go, oh man, that's how you did that. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
That in the library.
I think the other cool thing about streaming media, of course, streaming platforms, not just Paramount Plus, but you get to, for the most part, binge watch things like you just said. So, you know, Prodigy's on there and you don't have to just watch one and think, oh no, I really want to watch the next one. You can actually go, right, let's go. Pizza, beer, or if you're, you know, a young child, like
you want.
Juice box and fruit and then binge watch the whole thing. The only thing is then you get to the end of the 10 episodes, which are fantastic, but then you think, I really want to see what happens next.
Yeah, that's the problem.
There's no good place to break it up. But I mean, I think after that 10th episode is very good, and I think it was, you know, we had in mind, right, Aaron, that there would be like a pause in there. So I think it's from a writing perspective, we always kind of, and this is something that the Hagemans and I brought over from sort of the Troll Hunters and the Tales of Arcadia show that we produced with Guillermo del Toro on Netflix, which was with that show, we had 52 episodes. They just ordered 52 episodes and they're just like, yeah, make a show. And so we realized, you know, at the time there wasn't really a rubric for that sort of long form CGI animated serialized storytelling. You know, we were mostly looking at live action stuff and in some ways the then somewhat fledgling Marvel cinematic universe of like, okay, how do you build a bigger story, but out of these sort of arcs. And so from the beginning, we were like, we know we have 20 episodes. They've strongly hinted that this is going to keep going. So let's assume we at least have 40 episodes to work with. And so we were like, all right, let's construct, all right, every 10 episodes, what's the arc of these episodes for these characters? You know, where are they eventually going to wind up, maybe at the end of the series? Where are they going to wind up at the end of the season? And so we were very regimented and specific in finding those midpoints and those ups and downs and the progression of each character arc, which is a luxury that, to my knowledge, I don't think any other Star Trek show has ever had to that degree. You know, the most you had was like the 26 episode seasons, but then to have 2 seasons that you're kind of able to play with to a certain degree, we were able to, and in a serialized storytelling format, it was a really interesting experiment, and I'm glad people are picking up on what we've been doing with it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Certainly the legacy shows from one series to another, are we going to get another series? Is it going to carry on? So, you know, I think Picard, they had said they were going to do 3, but I think that was just, we're going to do 3. That's all we're going to do, and that's it. And they could plan a little bit more, and I suppose that's a nice luxury to have.
Yeah, for sure.
Like
you say, with Voyager, had, you know, like 7 years, but like Enterprise only had like 4 or 5, didn't it? You know, that's the thing that you're talking about.
Even with, you know, like with the Next Generation, right? Wasn't it? It was real like touch and go at first.
Yeah, it was on the
quite a while.
Like the reason Best of Both Worlds exists as an episode is because they didn't know if Patrick Stewart was coming back or not, because he was just like, he had such a sort of uneven experience, shall we say, and the show wasn't like a ratings hit yet. And so they were like, we have to build this in just in case Riker needs to take over. And then he came back for a 3rd season and like, all right, well, let's unwind that.
I think for the first series, I think Marina Sirtis always said from the first series, she never unpacked her suitcase from the hotel she was in because she never thought it was going to go, you know, they never knew. She just assumed at the end of series 1, that was it. We're going home. Bye-bye. So it was, they had a bit more of a difficult time, to be fair, because obviously they were, you know, they had the half of the people saying this is not the original series.
Sure.
and they had half the people kind of interested to see what is this new show, where is it going to go, battle that with a juggling old scripts from phase 2 that never happened. So it does feel original series for the most part for series 1. And it was all like, what's going to happen? It was just a juggling act, wasn't it? But luckily it did
syndication as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. But luckily it did well and opened the door for everything else, basically. Luckily,
I know it's so strange to think that here we are in what I kind of consider a third wave of Star Trek, right? Because you had the original series and the movies for a long time, and that's all there was, and then TNG came along and kind of opened up the sort of Rick Berman era, and now you have the J.J. Abrams films that have since sort of given the gateway to Discovery, which in turn has allowed for this explosion of Star Trek content. And, I remember those very dark days circa 2005, when Enterprise got canceled prematurely and everybody was saying, well, that's it for Star Trek. It was fun while it lasted. Like studios aren't going to touch it for a 10-foot pole. Like maybe you'll get it 30 years from now. But, otherwise, just it was a nice thing that we had for a while. And I was so sad because it was such a big part of my life. And now here we are, and it's like a renaissance, and people are allowed to experiment with the form in ways that I think haven't really been done since, I guess, arguably Deep Space Nine. But even then, I think they got away with that because the powers that be were kind of focused on Voyager, and Deep Space Nine kind of was able to do whatever they wanted. And they were able to take some of those bold swings and truly be inventive. Where a Star Trek show where they're stuck on a space station and over half the cast aren't in Starfleet. That's crazy.
I think, and the fans as well had a big part in it. They've kept the fires lit, since 05 and the Enterprise and them.
You're absolutely right. Thanks to the fans for lighting the pyre of Gondor.
But I think you hear it a lot now. But I think it was kind of like franchise fatigue, wasn't it? It was the thing mentioned at the time.
Yeah.
But I think that the new era of streaming in particular, Disney is doing this now, Paramount Plus is doing it, of finding ways to give each show its own unique vibe and voice, I think helps stave off that franchise fatigue. And so I will say right off the bat that Paramount Plus has been very generous, at least creatively, content-wise, towards letting us kind of do our own thing and put our own stamp on this show without it they're not coming in and saying, can you make this more like Voyager, or we don't know about this arc. They've given us almost complete carte blanche from both Secret Hideout and Nickelodeon, just to kind of, at least content wise, and then the rest of it is like, how can we actually make this show?
I was going to ask, that was going to be one of my questions, actually. So I've actually got a note here that says continuity, because obviously you kind of sit timeline in between Lower Decks and Picard, and it's like, have you had conversations with those other shows as to what you might do, might not do? I mean, you're kind of looking roughly 3 years after Lower Decks, but you're sort of sat 16 years before Picard, so you've got quite a nice space of time to work within there.
Well, yes, actually, I would say, would you say, Patrick, we have conversations come up at least maybe every month or two, and sometimes we'll just have big showrunner roundtables where all the showrunners get together and just kind of talk about what they're doing for the seasons. But even as we're like breaking episodes, we're like, oh, we really want to focus on this quadrant, or we maybe want to bring in this character, or focus, pull this thread of this storyline from TNG or from Deep Space Nine or Voyager or whatever. And then Secret Hideout, oh, actually they were Lower Decks was considering using that, and we'll have a conversation with them. Or Picard was considering doing something with this character, so we'll have a conversation with them. And usually the net result is we kind of talk it out, and we're like, oh, there's actually an opportunity here and then we'll kind of like almost bridge the writer's room from the top down and say, this is where this is how they connect together. This is what we're going to put in this show, so it connects to this show, and vice versa. And there's already been some of those in other shows that you'll find out are planted there for a reason.
And there's some stuff we did at the beginning that we just didn't know. So we were kind of just like poking in the dark. We ended up modeling a bunch of legacy characters and stuff we wanted to have on the show, and we couldn't end up doing. But the you know, like in the end, I think it's a combination of what Aaron's doing with you know, checking in with the other scripts from the other series, but it's also I think there's a lot of luck in there that's been very synergistic. It's so hard to track, and because of the timelines and because of like the way the TV series are produced, I mean, it takes us like 18 months from soup to nuts to get from the beginning to the end. So, you know, like if that stuff's already written, if that stuff's already like gone into production, you know, and the same thing is happening with the other series. So it's like when you're able to get something in there that, you know, you're making a choice, it could be one of two things, you're kind of it's a 50-50, you know, and then it lands and it ends up hooking up with the other series. It's just like it's been a real, I think it's been a real lucky blessing that like we've had a couple of those that have really synergized nicely.
Yeah, and it is absolutely, as Patrick is saying, an ongoing process where, you know, if there is something that is introduced, you know, at a later, past the point of no return for some stages, that they're like, oh, by the way, we're doing this, or this costume looks like this or whatever, then we'll find some way as best we can, you know. And there's sort of like a hierarchy of like either if there's time to tweak the design to make sure it matches, we'll do that. You know, I think that happened with one character actually.
Yeah, we've had instances where, you know, we're full at work, full clip, running as fast as we can, trying to get this thing out, and then, you know, Picard season 2's trailers hit the airwaves, and that was the first time I had seen them. I don't know if it was the first time you'd seen them, Aaron, but like there was like a day where we got into work and we like, we have to have a meeting because like we picked this thing for this time period, and now there's like this thing in the trailer that we need to, you know, take accounting of, and we got to go back and we got to do a bunch of work, or we got to figure out a way to like logic this out, you know, like in the story so that it makes sense. And it's like, so we do get those curveballs all the time where somebody does something tricky in an episode of Picard and we just didn't know about it ahead of time or something, and we see it and we go, we have to change course.
because even though at the top level we are kind of planning this stuff out and you know, trying to figure out the big bolts, like it's a big evolving moving behemoth, and sometimes those decisions trickle down to like 5 different layers of departments, and then they'll do a last minute reshoot and you're like, all right, we're going to do a flashback, and then we have to be like, well, that flashback's in our era and so we have to find some way to pivot. And sometimes it's like what they used to do on the Rick Berman, you know, shows, where there would be something that you know, at first might be like, how does this jive with this other episode, and then you'd have a character basically lay it out in a conversation that feels almost like turning to the audience of like, don't worry, we're thinking about this stuff. and so like we are thinking about all of this stuff, and it means a lot to us to make sure that it does connect as best as we can.
We agonize over it.
Yeah, I think
as deep fans, we agonize over it. I promise. Every day.
And so, there have been weekends where I've lost sleep the whole weekend, and then the episode comes out, and they're like, "Oh, that was good." And so, like, I don't know why I was so worried.
I was worried.
I've had that too.
Does it help that you're doing animation rather than live action in order to make these changes quicker, or is that not the case? Is it more work or less work?
Gosh, it's a difficult question there. I think it's
that is a good question.
I would say it's about the same amount of work in some regards, but stretched out over a long period of time. And sometimes it's more work because animation has so many stages, which Patrick can kind of walk you through. But like, it's easier to change something at the beginning of the stage than way at the end of the stage.
Right. So we try to we take the scripts and we break down the scripts, and then we try to figure out what the assets are going to be. And then it goes into a boarding phase. But because of the timeline, we have to be building things and designing things at the same time as somebody is kind of like blocking out the episode. And so those things don't line up a lot of the time, and then we have to play catch up with each other to, you know, somebody put something in the animatic that, you know, nobody accounted for because it's director's decision. So we've got to build that stuff. we get these little curveballs. Somebody in an episode of Picard might be wearing a lapel pin or something like that in a different way, and we'll have to take that into account. So it's really just with the animation, it's more about something with the weight of a locomotive, like at speed. And so if anything changes to that locomotive, like it doesn't slow down. It doesn't slow down because somebody runs into the side of it with a horse or something like that. It just keeps moving at the speed. So you've got to like get out of the conductor booth, crawl back a couple of cars, fix that hitch, and then climb back into the conductor's booth and make sure nothing hitched in the process. So because of the long timeline and the weight moving at that speed is what makes it so hard. And I figure I don't know about the live action, but I figure the live action is probably just the other edge of the sword, right? It's probably just trickier to assemble an actor at the last minute and get that
to change something like that.
Get that last minute shoot that you need to do, or to get a prop designer to make a prop at the last minute and give it to and pick up scenes.
Yeah, or the old like, oh, by the way, this location we were counting on turns out it's going to cost us $50,000 extra. Can you you've already shot 2/3 of the episode. Can you just quickly rewrite the remaining 1/3 to not have to use that location?
Or somewhere that looks similar. It's cheaper.
Right. Yeah, so it's like crazy. Or this actor is refusing to say these lines, come up with something else on the fly that still makes sense in the context of the episode, which is thankfully in animation we don't deal with that stuff as much because it is so methodical. But but as Patrick was saying, if something happens, late in the game,
but in some cases we do, because one of the things that helps them at the episode in the end is I think Aaron goes through the episode at the very end of the process, and he knows that if when you watch it in continuity, once it's all said and done or basically like fixed, if something doesn't make sense, you're kind of stuck because you can't go back and reanimate 7 scenes to lead into it and make sure it works. So Aaron has to very cleverly like go in there and be like, well, Zero doesn't have a mouth, so we'll give Zero a line.
We can change his line to whatever we want.
We can change his line because there's no lip sync to reanimate.
That's
or
true.
if there's a character that has their back to the camera, or if somebody had just moved off scene and we cut and you hear like an off-screen line across 2 shots, so Aaron will add like 4 or 5 different lines throughout the episode that just kind of like make it flow better and make everything a little more.
Or answer a question that maybe was answered in the longer cut but got trimmed for time, and then for whatever reason it got lost through the cracks of like, oh, we forgot to put some. So those tricks, by the way, are borrowed directly from live action, and that's usually for instance, when a film has shot and they don't have any more money for reshoots, you're in the editing bay and they're like, oh gosh, the scene doesn't make sense. You have the actor come back in, the A-list actor, and do what's called looping or ADR, and that's so like a lot of times we'll have live action people that have not done much or any voiceover, and then you'll have them do it. They're like, oh, I've done this before, because they'll sometimes have to lip match their own performance in the live action.
Yeah.
They've done a lot on the legacy shows with that. I know in the Delta Flyers podcast, the guys were talking about looping and doing the ADR, going in quite regular to do bits and pieces of that. So what you're saying is basically, it's easier than live action. No, I'm joking. It does sound like there's a lot more hard work goes into it than what normal people would think when they just stick a show on.
I think it's like when you do live action things. I mean, like I've done a little bit of like live action stuff on the side, and it's like it's easy to get somebody to get, you can say, okay, just stand back a little farther.
Yeah.
Wait 1 extra second. Go, okay, now wait 2 seconds and do it. Go, and to do that and to iterate that way is much faster. And you also have a human being that is, like a trained professional that knows how to bring things to this role. So they're thinking, you're thinking, everything is collaborative. With the animation, you're putting a dummy in space, and then you're requiring every movement, every articulation, every twitch in the face, everything that you're doing on screen has to be like mechanized by somebody. Which is, you know, like you might get like if like Jack Nicholson is like shooting, he might like wince in a certain way that makes the scene the way that the scene is, and that the way that everybody will remember it, or the way he approaches it, you know. But like with this dummy that you're playing with in animation, you have to think of everything. And I mean that's the play, and that's the fun, is to see how close you can get to that barrier of that realism. And I think we do a really, really good job. I think the show is unique in its facial performance and its ability to get those long lens film cameras right in the face of the main characters, and get you know, like the movements in their eyes, and get like the nuances of their cheeks, and get the line read for these like special emotional moments that are like really, really particular and important to Star Trek.
Yeah, I was going to search you with the animation, the 3D animation element. Is that new to Star Trek Prodigy, or is that something that you've used in animated shows previously?
Well, Patrick could probably speak to that.
For what is that? Sorry, can you?
The 3D animation that's used in Prodigy, is that kind of a new method for Prodigy, or has it been used in previous shows?
So the pipeline that we're doing has been like under construction for a long time. Like I obviously, like CG animation is new to Prodigy, like within the series and stuff like that, but we've been doing CG shows at Nickelodeon since 2007, I believe. Maybe even before, but not with like a constructed department. So we've had, you know, we've had maybe 15. I'll get the number wrong, so I'm hesitant to say the number.
They've been doing it for a while, but in-house, I think they've been at it for a while.
Yeah, and so the last big thing that we did was in 2012 we did a reboot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when,
of course,
when we bought the property. And so that was really successful, but that was using technology back from like 2010 to 2012. And after Turtles, we had spent so much time in a pipeline that was old, you know, because like once you bury the hatchet, like at 2012 technology, if it's 2018 and you're still making the show, you're still making the show with 2012 technology. You can upgrade some things along the way, but you don't really have like a huge opportunity to. So we were able to play around with new rendering techniques, new technologies, and new pipelines. We made a show for the movie Wonder Park that never reached the air because of for whatever reason. And we made a couple of TV movies and things along those lines. And so we built a pipeline that nobody else really uses. We're using a lot of video game techniques, and we're using GPU rendering, which means that the rendering is happening on the video card and not on the main processor, which allows us to iterate faster and to render faster, and to get that look that you see in Star Trek, which I think is a very closer to a photoreal version of, you know, the cartoon medium that you've seen in other things, but that they just can't really achieve with the budget and the time that they have. And so that's where I think our success is. And then, I mean, where I thought that line was going to be when we started, and where that line got to, you know, when we're at a full clip, the way that we're working in production right now, it's just like we blew past the barrier that I thought we would have so long ago. And every episode we're doing these things that I just didn't think would ever be possible, you know. And we've got a great team, and we've got brilliant, passionate people that are invested in the property and are fans and love it. And I think that's what you're seeing on the screen. If everybody on staff didn't absolutely love what they were doing, they would break, because of what we're doing within our boundaries. And I'm just really proud of everybody on the team, because I think that the show it's absolutely the best thing I've ever worked on. It's the best looking thing. It's the best story I've ever worked. It's the most, like it fires on all cylinders.
Yeah, I think one of the exciting things for me has been that, as Paul said a while ago, we spoke to Garrett Wang a few months ago about Star Trek Voyager, and we were saying it was a shame it didn't get the feature movies, and we didn't get to see the sort of return to Earth and what the technology coming back from the Delta Quadrant and the science would lead to. But with Star Trek Prodigy and with certain elements in the end of Picard as well, we're actually getting to see that. So we're seeing what happened with Janeway, what happened with Chakotay, and this technology, maybe some of that being brought in to develop the Protostar.
Yeah, 100%. Like that was. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it's really important too that we're doing something that's a little different, because there's some shows that are going, there are some shows, not Star Trek shows, but some shows that are going back and retconning some old content, sci-fi content that people love, and they're like part of the original lore and love comes from the mystery. And so I think it's really important to make clear that, like, what's been nice is that we're not trying to fill in blanks that that tell people like how things went down or what happened in the interim while they've been away, or we're not trying to like smooth out any mystery. We're really just creating new story, like in the gaps, like you're saying.
But even to your point, David, was so in the writer's room, at least I remember the first 3 or 4 weeks when we just were like, okay, what is the setting here? We thought very heavily, like, okay, what are some new things that we could bring in to the franchise? Because obviously it's right there in the mandate: new worlds and new civilizations, new science fiction concepts, new sci-fi technologies that kind of, because we wouldn't have cell phones if it weren't for communicators, like we wouldn't have iPads if it weren't for pads.
For the pads.
So like, we were like, what we were thinking, like, okay, where did the sort of the cursor stop moving, and like what would that look like 6 years later? And as we kind of talked through, how truly revolutionary Voyager's return would be, because that the whole premise of that show was, okay, we are 70,000 light years away from Earth. And our current even 24th century technology is unable to get there shorter than 70 years. And so like the whole premise of the show is, how can we find new technology and new ways to basically break even the Federation's understanding of science and warp speed limitations in order to get home faster. And of course, the whole show is them collecting all of this incredible technology. And so, that would be absolutely game changing to the Federation, whose very foundation is built on exploration and pushing out to those new boundaries. So if you bring, everything they know about Borg transwarp, everything that they found in like, enhanced warp drive or coaxial drive or
slipstream,
slingshots, barbed wire, underspace. It goes on and on and on. Like it's all of it is utterly sea changing. And so like we were like, well, let's look at what those early days are. Like, imagine if somebody just came back from Mars and said, oh, we found an alien civilization, here's a bunch of technology, and they've studied it. You have the Federation, which is effectively trillions of scientists whose job it is, like all their needs are taken care of, so all they do is just sit around and do science all day. Like and I would imagine they would start to piece together some cool stuff for them that would would allow them to, maybe miniaturize industrial replicators, which already existed on Deep Space Nine, but like, oh, what if they did that and use it to build shuttles on the fly? Because as we know, Voyager had a shuttle problem.
No.
No.
How many shuttles did they have?
They had at least several Sacagaweas, I think. But that was part of the real fun in the early days process, was just like, well, where is the Federation now? Because the fun of Star Trek isn't just it's always exactly the same as it was 20 years ago. It's like, oh, how have things changed? What are new technologies, new alien races, new civilizations, and how are those, rather than fundamentally altering everything that you know and love, but rather enhancing it and expanding that purview of what Star Trek and what the Federation is. And that became sort of like the undercurrent of our exploration of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think the genius of the show as well is obviously it's predominantly aimed at children, younger adults, and it's a great jumping point for them, even if they have no knowledge of Star Trek. They can easily relate to the characters who are learning as they're going through the show, as the kids watching it are, but also the adults that have grown up with Star Trek. There is some familiarity in there as well. So adults can enjoy it and watch it as well.
You say adults, Dave, but really it's just big kids. Because I absolutely love the whole thing, to be honest. It's funny. I'm being taught by hologram Janeway as I'm watching it, which I guess was the intention. To bridge that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, in terms of that tone stuff, the mandate that the Hagemans and I always shared was, we want to make shows that we would enjoy watching too. And it harkens back to, I grew up, I was an 80s kid, 80s. And so and the Hagemans were too, to a certain degree. And so there's this sort of, from that era, 80s, early 90s, there's this idea of 4-quadrant storytelling, no pun intended for Star Trek fans. But the 4-quadrant is male, female, young, and old, meaning like it appeals to everyone. And that's where you have movies like E.T. or Jurassic Park or Indiana Jones, where everybody goes in with different expectations and different wants. And they come out of it satisfied, and it becomes what's called a co-viewing experience that everybody can watch it and say, wow, what a great formative story. And for me, that was Star Trek to a certain degree. Like, one of my earliest memories was watching the premiere of Star Trek The Next Generation back in September of 1987 with my dad on the couch. And I had no idea what I was watching, but I knew it was very exciting, and I was feeding off my dad's energy, and we both got something out of it, because I was like, oh, cool, pew pew spaceships. And my dad was like, oh my God, Enterprise is back.
Right.
Your Venn diagram is basically just put a big circle around all of it. That's basically.
And it's been very nice to see like tweets and messages from fans saying, finally, there's a Star Trek that my kids can get into, and also my dad can get into. And so we have like 3 generations of Trekkies in the making, all watching it together. And that was what and that was sort of like our mandate from the beginning of this show, is like, for better, for worse, television and the aesthetic of television has shifted. We're now in sort of a golden age, peak TV, where every episode is expected to a certain degree to be like a movie or this sort of grand epic story. And we're like, how can we infuse the Star Trek element of that into this? And so we can catch the kids' eyes, but also, before this, it was so hard to tell a kid, like, because I'd have people say, where do I start watching Star Trek? And I'm like, I don't know, watch like 100 episodes and you'll kind of get the swing of it.
You'll get there in the end.
I have tried in the past where someone said, I need to get into Star Trek, and it's like, okay, pick this episode, because I thought it was a good one. And it's like, oh, that was boring. It's like,
well, that's the thing. It's like, and even the movies, which I think are a decent place to jump in, they're not. I don't know if you'll get as much out of them if you don't have the context of those characters and that world. So that was kind of a mandate of like, let's just for the sake of it, let's try to come in with like a tabula rasa of like, what if there are these teenage aliens that are outside Federation space that have very little exposure to it, and the whole point is like they're your entry point into the world. And a lot of things that I think most Trek fans absolutely take for granted, like universal translators or transporters, stuff like kids might not immediately understand, and there aren't that many like universal translator episodes, for instance. There's a few notably great ones like Darmok or what have you, but even then they don't really get into the principles of how they work, what the range is, this, that. So we were like, what if we start in a place where there is no universal translator by design? And then you see the wonder of what the ability to communicate with someone else that is different than you, which I think is Star Trek to the T.
Yeah, that especially comes into its own in the episode the ship comes back into Tars Lamora, and they have the universal translators, and all the mining workers can actually talk to each other for the first time and actually, get together and mount a resistance and know what they all stand for.
Yeah, that was absolutely my intention. I think that when we were breaking out the first 10 episodes, it was like, what is about communication that allows you to broaden your horizons in both the literal and figurative sense. And it allows you to work together, and that's what Star Trek is. It's the story of the many over the one.
Then you see the other side of it as well, don't you, with the Volnacat on Solon, where the Prime Directive goes well awry, and it has a very negative impact on that planet and that civilization.
It's true. Although I don't think this is a spoiler. You're going to find out a little bit more about the nature of that and how no man is an island, and how do I say this? Civilizations, I guess, they have differing opinions, right? And so, as we know, it was revealed in the first 10 episodes, it was a civil war where half were like, "Hey, actually, this Federation sounds pretty good," right? And then the other half were the sort of the xenophobic, like, "No, we're the best. This is earth shattering." It's Galileo getting put on trial for daring to say that the Earth revolves around the sun.
I mean, at the moment, we've just got the diviner's perspective of it, haven't we? And then that is all we've got to go off. And like you say, the full story's not been unraveled yet.
Yeah, for sure.
It's nice to explore that, actually, because even in sort of legacy Trek, you see episodes where they'll go and do first contact, and it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. And they're told to basically sling the rook and go away. Well, what happens when they leave? There's still going to be all those conversations happening. Why didn't we? Shouldn't we? It would have been better or not.
And and I think that's always going to be an evergreen topic, because for better or for worse, the world is becoming a smaller place, and we all have to learn how to coexist in some way, even if it's difficult. And that's really what Star Trek's been about.
Yeah, and it's based on the whole white Europeans going into the Americas, isn't it? In like 14th, 15th century, and the disaster that became, is almost based a little bit on that, isn't it? Where one civilization comes into contact with the other, and it can either live together in harmony and both improves each other and they thrive, or they destroy each other, or one ends up falling away.
Yeah, to a certain degree. The difference, I think, being that the Federation aren't really sort of like a colonial conquering group, but no, that certain idea of like, well, if you aren't colonizing and forcing your ideas on others, how do you kind of find a common ground? And I think we're still figuring that out as 21st century citizens.
Yeah, well, unfortunately,
that's usually in Star Trek. That's usually like the gambit. That's usually like the proof that they have to put out, right? Is usually the society is very skeptical that they're not colonizers, that they're not going to change their way of life and their way of thinking, and the Federation always kind of has to prove that they're benevolent, and if you want to be a part of this, it's cool. But
yeah. Let's excuse me. Let's take a slight segue, because we're going to bring on our first feature, which is always very exciting, which is called Geeky Guys Favorites. Now, on our normal podcast series, me and Dave would ask each other what our favorite of a particular thing is, just randomly, just silly bits and pieces. When we have guests, we like to ask you guys instead. I've got a card here in front of me with 5 things on, so I'm just going to get one of you to just throw a number out between 1 and 5.
4.
4. Oh, this is a nice, easy one, actually. We'll do the same question for both of you. So this is simply, what's your favorite Star Trek character that's not from your show? You can't cheat and pinch one from your show.
That's a tricky one. Patrick, do you want to go first? I have a couple in my head.
I don't want to go first.
Okay, I'll go first.
I mean, it's so hard. I mean, I think for me, fundamentally, my favorite character always was Captain Picard. You know, because I think you know, not only does he changes from season to season drastically, and he changes with the people that he comes in contact with, and he changes with his crew, you know, and it goes from kind of like a military operation almost, you know, in that first season to, you know, being his best friends in that last episode, you know, when he sits down to play cards with them.
Yeah.
But I think that strong figure of authority and morality was very, very important, you know, to get into plots where there's an obvious easy way out, and there's the hard and the right way, and differentiating those and making sense of those to an audience in a way that leaves them walking away from the episode thinking about the moral questions that they have to face on a day-to-day basis, thinking about their interactions with their family, with their loved ones, thinking about the way that they are participating or not participating in society for the better or for the worse of the collective good. And his embodiment of those ideals was really, I think, at a time where, you know, like Aaron was saying in 1987, you know, as somebody that was a preteen, that was coming out of a world that, you know, like when you're a child, you're sheltered, and you're coming into the realization of what life really is and what choices really mean, to get that character and to be able to look up to that person and learn from that, and take those lessons away into your life, I think was probably one of the most like solidly foundational things that I had growing up. So he's absolutely, I know it's kind of a cop-out to say Captain Picard's my favorite, but like he is absolutely my favorite for those reasons.
No, I mean, it's not a cop-out. When you were saying that, 3 lines spring to mind in my head, which was Jeremy on the Starship Enterprise, nobody is alone, which with the young child Jeremy, and you say is mellowed a little bit towards children as he goes through the series, and that sense of family. You've got the Drumhead Court episode and Measure of a Man. So they jumped in my head when you were talking there about the morality and doing the right thing.
To say that, to say things like, you know, you can still do everything correctly, but ultimately lose, and that's life. That's not failure. Just, you know, it's things like that you know, or become constant mantras in your life. You know, you think back to them when things get hard, or when things go sideways. You rely on those rules and those ideals.
That is not failure, that is life, I think was the line. That's
or even Measure of a Man, where it's like, you know, our mantra is to seek out new life. Well, there it sits, you know, and you know, it's that sort of challenge to even those. It's a little bit people who might think they're open-minded, but then they don't realize they have these sort of limitations. It's like, no, you can't just draw arbitrary boundaries that exclude people and the other. You know, you have to reconsider everything if you truly want to seek where truth lies.
And the idea that like there's bias in there, and that if we can just look at the information, and if we can just talk about what we agree about and talk about the things we disagree about and come to a better understanding of who the two of us are, you know, that we come out, you know, both better people in the end, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Aaron, you're not off the hook. Your favorite character.
No, I mean, I could go through each series and talk about my favorite character, but I mean, if I had to choose, I would say it's probably a 3-way tie, and they're all from Deep Space Nine. And it's Odo, Quark, and Garak are my three favorites. And the reason is, and I have a reasoning, which is, I think that they kind of in many ways represent the story of all of Star Trek, where it's like they are kind of reflecting of the outsiders looking in of and I always think back to that conversation you have between like Quark and Garak, where they're trying root beer. The Earthlings drink it. It's cloyingly sweet. And he's like, oh, it's disgusting. And he's like, and you know what? And you know what the worst part it is? The more you drink it, the more you start to like it.
Yes.
and then Garak is like, it's insidious. And that sort of I guess lens in which we humans can kind of be able to view ourselves and our quirks and our peccadillos, it really is Star Trek writ large, because that's all Star Trek is us just challenging our assumptions about ourselves. In this case, in most cases, it's by venturing out into those strange life civilizations, but in this case, it's having those sort of aliens who are thrust into this sort of melting pot on Deep Space Nine. And even between them, they have very, very differing opinions of how life should be. Obviously, Quark is the space capitalist, and Odo is this sort of the law and order man, but he actually doesn't really. He's an interesting sort of security officer in that he's before the Federation he served with the Cardassians, and he was just sort of like, I'm just trying to. He's very sort of pragmatic, where he's like, I'm just trying to bring justice as best I can within the system I'm presented. And then it's over the course of the series that he kind of expands and realizes that's not good enough, and he has to actually stand for something. And when he eventually winds up being the savior, and arguably the savior of the Federation, by going to the Dominion and basically brokering a peace with them. And sort of sacrificing himself in some ways to do so, or at least his life aboard Deep Space Nine with Kira and the future therein. And Garak, of course, is exactly the same. He's sort of like this weird, chaotic, neutral cipher of a character who you think is just sort of when he's introduced, everyone's like, oh yeah, he's a spy. Everyone's like, don't trust him. Don't trust him. He's a bad person. And then by the end of it, he's bringing a moral gray area, I think, of like the concept of the greater good, especially in episodes where he's faking stuff and killing people in order to bring the Romulans into the Federation. But by the end, he's thrown his lot in.
He was like, he's basically the Taylor of Panama, right? Like he's just a spy on the ground.
Yeah. And his perspective is, I would rather stare at the truth of the world, warts and all, and still try to make it a better place on those terms than live purely in that ideal. But I think that what's interesting is, I think even Garak by the end of the series is like, he's clearly fighting for Starfleet. Like he's doing everything he can as best as in the only ways he knows how, in order to preserve the Federation and what it stands for, even if he doesn't totally believe that it's that utopia is achievable in real terms.
He almost becomes that lovable rogue in the end, doesn't he? Really, where it's sort of he's done bad things and he knows he has, but it's kind of nice with the Federation around, because he can kind of get away with a lot more because he's a bit sneaky. Right. I think my favorite line from Garak is at the end of the story, where they talk about the wolf in sheep's clothing, and he says, the doctor says, and he says, what's the moral of the story? And the doctor's like, never, if you keep telling lies, no one will believe you. And he's like, are you sure that's the moral, doctor? And he said, and Dr. Bashir says, well, what else could it possibly be? And he just looks at him, and you get this lovely close-up as he looks at the camera and says, never tell the same lie twice. And it's just brilliant. I love that line.
Yeah, but I love that they all kind of just challenge some assumptions we have about the Boy Scout goody two-shoes Starfleet. But in the end, they are like, well, perhaps if we just sort of expand our vision a little bit of what that umbrella can tolerate, and maybe we can even we can learn something from the Ferengi, and the Ferengi can learn something from us. I think that sort of idea of like, if your worldview winds up excluding people, then perhaps there's a way that you both can expand your worldview. I think that is a really wonderful message in any story you tell.
Speaking of messages in stories, I did want to just mention, so going back to Prodigy for a second, it's quite clear that there's a moral of the story running through the episodes, or at least it seems like that as a casual viewer. So the shows certainly promote the idea of working together and trusting each other, and they come through. I suppose they would naturally if you've got a group of people who aren't used to doing that. But was that something you purposely designed in as something that children would get and hold on to and take with them?
Oh, absolutely. From the beginning in the writer's room, we were like, what are the core tenets of the Federation? And it is just a bunch of disparate member worlds, seeing that there is a greater possibility and a better future, a light at the end of the tunnel, if we work together and find common interests and goals while also celebrating our diversity and our differences, and viewing those as strengths rather than things that need to be sanded off.
Yeah.
I think that those are very relatable terms to any child, when as Patrick was alluding to earlier, as you go from elementary school to middle school, and suddenly all your friends start finding different interests, or you're not in the same classes as them. And there's all these different people you've never met before that might have wildly different sort of backgrounds or points of views or interests than you. You find your own family. And I think that's that idea of a found family of even if you don't have someone at home, that could support you, you can always find those support systems out there if you're willing to sort of open yourself up to them. And that for the characters in particular, I think we wanted, in order to highlight what the Federation provides, in terms of a post-scarcity utopia, we wanted to start with people that didn't have that. They didn't have a family at home. They didn't have a society or a familial unit of sorts. So they were all kind of just trying to survive. And we talked a lot about in sort of child psychology, there's this idea called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Hierarchy of needs, yeah.
Yeah. And so we were like, well, obviously the Federation kind of provides all that so that they can kind of self-actualize. And their biggest concern is, all right, what am I going to dedicate my intellectual pursuits to today? Whereas, there's a lot of kids out there in our world, unfortunately, but also I would argue in the greater Milky Way galaxy in the 4 quadrants that haven't been exposed to the things that the Federation provides. And so we wanted to start with well, how do you find your own way? And for the Federation, in my opinion, it's like everyone is unmolded clay, and if you're provided those opportunities, you can become your best self. And that's something we wanted first for them to find in each other, and then in the greater ideals that Starfleet represents.
Yeah, it's kind of teaching kids the odd thing as well, that it doesn't matter if you're different. It doesn't matter if you think a different way to what you would class as like the normal crowd. If you don't feel that you fit in, it's really good in the show that it kind of does show that their strengths do come out in unexpected ways, and they start forming respect for each other. And they're actually good at doing that. They can do that. Actually they fit into that. They can do that. And it's just really nice. And like you say, they're all kind of these disparate characters with, not a lot known about them really, about their past. And Dal doesn't even know what his origin is, who his parents are, what his home world is. And it's kind of the discovery of all of that. And you're taking their children along with them and learning lessons along the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think if anything, it shows you that it's better to have a diverse group of people working together, if anything. Because you bring your own individual differences together to make a better whole.
It's true. And you never know what when you'll come across a situation where if all of you had the exact same background and experiences and training and abilities, you might be SOL because you don't have that certain ability or thought or point of view to kind of look at things in a different way and find the solution.
The characters too are very cleverly designed to sit in all of those pockets too. I mean, there are times where I'm watching the episodes and I think to myself oh, maybe I'm a little like Junker Pog. oh, maybe I'm a little like Rock. And it's funny to see, you know, what character you identify with and when you identify with them, because they're all so different and their backgrounds are so different and their thinking is so different and the way they respond to situations is so different. So it's a really nice mirror to have so many different entities like working together.
It would be interesting eventually to do one of those online quizzes where you sort of answer a series of questions. You are most like this person. That'd be interesting to do the Prodigy one, unless you cheat like I do. So when I do the Doctor Who ones, I try and answer them so I get David Tennant every time. But that's just me. I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes there's questions that are very like telling, like
yeah. Do you like long coats, short coats, waistcoats, long coats?
What's your opinion of scarves?
The longer the better. Tom Baker. Yeah, that would be interesting to do. We're going to jump into our second feature, which is we call Geeky Guys Did You Know? Now, normally me and Dave, again, we try and out trivia at each other with a few bits of trivia. We're certainly not going to be able to do that with you guys. But we obviously did mention to you previously that maybe you could bring a piece of trivia maybe about Prodigy that maybe we didn't know, a little tidbit that doesn't give anything away. I know that we've got a couple of bits of trivia, but
got of our own, haven't we?
Little bit. So, Dave, do you want to jump off with yours? Yours is a general Star Trek one, I think, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So apparently, in the beginning of the original series, Leonard Nimoy, Spock, obviously he ends up with greenish sort of lemon skin, but apparently it was originally meant to be red. So apparently Spock was supposed to be originally red-skinned, but because a lot of people still didn't have colour televisions, he would have shown up very dark in black and white. So that's why they ended up going for the more greeny, yellowy type of colour.
Yeah, I think he also, the design originally, I might be making this up, but I feel like he had other stuff too, like a tail or something. And like they added some really crazy stuff.
I'm so glad you said that, because me and Dave had a meeting before you guys came on today. And one of the things when we were talking about trivia and we said that, I said to Dave, I thought Spock's ears were slightly more devilish, or there was something devilish about it.
Yeah, he looked like, he basically looked like a space devil.
Yeah. So yeah, I think if we both get that right, then it must be true. It's got to be.
Yeah.
My trivia was going to be about the 3D computer generated stuff that you're doing now, which is obviously a first for Star Trek, which we've already kind of said. So that's that gone. So I'll just quite quickly pick one out of my mind, which was the original shooting model of the Enterprise NX-01 from the original series. I believe was only painted on one side because it was held on a stick, and they did that. So because it was only ever filmed from one side, so when they actually took it away and put it in a museum, they had to like repaint all of it so it looked the same because it was only repainted on one side. I think that's true, but being as it was just out of my head, it might be completely rubbish.
You might have dreamt it.
We'll get letters, Dave. We'll get letters.
I do know actually.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just to say, well, just speaking of that specific model, apparently that was sitting in Gene Roddenberry's office for several years, but then afterwards it disappeared and no one knows where it went. Like, because I think the Enterprise wanted to or the Smithsonian wanted to put it on display, and they went
to have one now, so I don't know whether they found it.
I think they might have had either like a later model,
right,
or something, or it might have been from one of the movies, or I can't remember. There was like, but there was like two models that they used, right. And like the very first one that they used for like the first couple seasons disappeared, and the Roddenberry estate couldn't find it. And then,
I did not know that. I like that. I know the Smithsonian had one of them, and it is the NX-01, and it's Constitution class.
So that's the one that's what I was going to bring up before Aaron, was that the Smithsonian had one of the originals from the original series, and it was in the gift shop of the Smithsonian.
Yes.
Nobody thought about like the historical importance of it. They had just like parked it in the gift shop. And like, I'm from Washington, D.C., so I grew up like seeing this thing in the gift shop at the Air and Space Museum. And I think it wasn't until very recently that they took it out and they restored it and they put it, in a glass case and made an exhibit around it.
Yeah, it was out for a good year while they restored it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I saw a video of that where it showed you them repairing it, and all the wear and tear on it was quite horrendous. If bars, they had to do a lot of work to make it look display material again.
You don't realize how big these things are when the not Sotheby's, when is it Sotheby's that did the big auction for all the Star Trek stuff, Dave, in the UK? They did a big auction, and everything got auctioned off, including the shooting model of the Enterprise D from series 1 and 2, and it's the big 6-foot model, and it's massive. They brought it out in a crate, and it was like the saucer section is like this
So
big.
where did that wind up, I wonder?
It went to auction, and someone bid on it and paid $500,000 for it.
So it's just some guy's garage.
It's some guy, $500,000. I hope they've got it and looking after it.
There are pictures, Aaron, of like there were a couple of these things, so there are pictures of one that's been dismantled and it's like in somebody's garage, and then taking it.
Yeah, there was a 4-foot model and a 6-foot model.
Yeah, the 4-foot model they introduced later on because of 10 forward, I think, and things. They used them later on. I don't know what happened to that one, but I know the 6-foot model went on to auction, and it was $500,000. It was the most expensive item in the auction. There was some more trivia. There we go. I found some more trivia.
I think the Enterprise, I was thinking it was maybe the prototype, like the very first, like this is what it could look like. It was in Gene's office.
Right.
I'll look it up later, or I'll get tweets saying you're completely wrong.
Very wrong.
Actually, we need your trivia. That's it. We're done, Dave. Is there any bits of interesting little bits of trivia maybe about Prodigy you could give us, or?
Yeah, there's a couple. One that springs to mind is obviously in Star Trek Prodigy, we introduced sort of like a new enhanced warp drive that uses a protostar as sort of like a power source, and that the inspiration for that sort of comes from several places. But in one case, there is the matter of the Romulans' ships are notoriously powered by sort of singularities, so basically like collapsed stars as their engine stars. So we thought wouldn't be interesting if, like, as kind of this detente is happening, post Nemesis, that maybe some of that technology is they're allowing them to experiment, and that's where the protostar came from. The other thing was in the episode what is it, the Omega Factor, the Omega Protocol,
the Omega Factor, I think it's called.
In Voyager, offhandedly, there is a line that was brought up in the first week of, like, what is the nature of the protostar? Why is it called the protostar? And we came up with this idea of this engine. There's a throwaway line in that episode where they're trying to figure out like what Omega is, and Harry Kim and as they're kind of like, why is Captain Keegan so classified? It's like, I heard she's planning to detonate a Type 6 protostar, which could open a wormhole back to the Alpha Quadrant. In theory, it's possible, and that was brought up week 1 by, I believe, Shauna Benson, one of our writers, and we were like, yep. That's what they did, because that was already like a theoretical possibility in Starfleet technology. And so they were like, what if we mash that in with whatever missing pieces in the equation was some buried in all the amazing technology they brought back from the Delta Quadrant. And so it was just like, this meets chocolate meets peanut butter. The other fun sort of, I guess, technology trivia thing I had for the inner workings of the protostar was in episode 10, I think it's 10, or it might be episode 9. They steal the proto drive, which, if you listen carefully, the computer identifies it as the exotic matter dilithium matrix missing, and exotic matter is a key component in a hypothetical drive called the Alcubierre drive, which is a theoretical physics answer to how we could actually create warp drive. So it was like a fun little nod there, because exotic matter is obviously matter that has yet to be discovered, but is capable of exotic properties, like, for instance, negative mass, which is required in order to bend space-time in such a way that you could go faster than the speed of light. So
nice.
It's a fun little sci-fi,
yeah, it's cool.
actual theoretical physics Easter egg, exotic matter dilithium matrix. And the dilithium matrix was already a component in Star Trek universe that has been firmly established that if it's damaged or goes offline, the warp core no longer functions. So that's why when they take that component out, the ship is dead in the water.
It's dead. Cool. I did hear, going back to the Omega protocol, a few months back, that there was the question of why 7 of 9 has never been allowed in the captain's chair or allowed into Starfleet after they've got back to Earth after traveling back from the Delta Quadrant. And one of the reasons that somebody stated why it might be is that because she's got that information about the Omega protocol from being in the hive mind with the Borg.
Could be. Yeah.
And the information was there perhaps from Picard, from Locutus, when a lot of the information from Starfleet that he had went into the hive mind. So that was potentially why she wasn't allowed in.
Very possibly, yes. Or just the wrong admiral. Just we had some prejudices against the Borg. Use that as an excuse.
Patrick, have you got a nice little bit of trivia for us?
I've got a little bit of trivia. It's not a Prodigy trivia.
Okay.
But, my favorite trivia is that, and this might be too well known to be trivia. I'm not sure. I never knew it, and so it excites me. But it's in Star Trek 4. You know the Doctor, Gillian Taylor.
Yeah.
That was originally supposed to be Eddie Murphy.
Really? I did not know that.
No, I didn't know that either.
Eddie Murphy was on the Paramount lot at the time, and they were hoping that he would be an astrophysicist that would help them get back to their future. And things fell apart at the last minute, and so they had to substitute him out for the woman that you see.
I hope they kept the love story between Eddie Murphy and Captain Kirk.
Right. I always thought that was funny because it was that in that period right there in the 80s where like Eddie Murphy was wildly famous and everybody
I'm kind of glad they didn't do that. I think it would have took something away from it. I think.
What it did was it kind of spread some of the fun out too, because like some of that comedy that was written for his role and for like his progression with the characters then got siphoned off and got given to like those the experience on the bus with like Spock and like all that kind of stuff. It became comedy that could be given to like Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner.
No, you're right. I feel like if it was Eddie Murphy, you wouldn't be able to see it as anything other than an Eddie Murphy movie. And then it would, at that point, it would just become almost like Scooby-Doo meets,
absolutely. If you take an Eddie Murphy line, you give it to Leonard Nimoy to read flat. It's very funny.
There was a lot of humor in that film. I loved it. The lines that they just got wrong because they just were in the wrong time. He did too much LDS. That's just hilarious.
Double dumbass on you.
That's it. Yeah. What does it mean? Exact change.
On that subject, did you? I don't know if you saw. This is kind of an extra bit of add-on trivia that's just come into my head because we're on the subject. Did you see in the notes for Picard in the last series that the punk on the bus in Star Trek 4 that Spock does the neck grip and everybody's clapping and turns the music off? It's the same punk that's with the radio in the bus in Picard that Seven sorts out.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's the same actor.
It's the same actor.
It's a gentleman named Kirk Thatcher who actually was actually working on the production of Star Trek on the previous films, and I think he might have been working on the production of that film as well when Nimoy was like, "Hey, why don't you play that character?" And I think he's done a little bit of acting since, and he's gone on to have a very prolific career as a writer director. He does a lot of stuff with the Muppets, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think he created a couple of puppets for the Muppets, Dark Crystal, like that sort of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, and curiously, this is just totally random. I was Nickelodeon had an event where we did like sometimes they'll, with the pandemic, just as a benefit for their employees, they will offer these sort of like classes. And we did like a sake tasting class, and so they sent sake to our houses, and then there was a person there from a sake company there, kind of like guiding us through, like, what do you taste in that and this, and it was a little bit like a wine tasting thing. And I said, like, oh, this one almost reminds me of sort of petrichor, and then suddenly this thing said, like, hey, I love that metaphor, and it was Kirk Thatcher, the punk on the bus. And he was in the class with me.
No way. He was there?
Yeah. And it turned out that he was directing on another project on Nickelodeon. I had no idea. And I like double taked. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, it's kind of when two worlds collide and you really don't expect it, isn't it? Them type of moments.
Yeah.
Like, what?
That's just, I want to just quickly go back to, because you started talking about science there and what could work, what wouldn't work. And I must admit, this is one thing I should really have thought of, and I didn't even look it up. So do you have, when you go through your script process, do you have a scientific person that you can go to say, can we do this? Because I know Andre Bermeras did sort of the DS9 TNG Voyager. He went on to do the Orville, in fact, didn't he? But But I just wondered if you had someone and you went and said, look, we're thinking of doing this. Is it possible? And it's like, yeah, we could use, the many wheels theory or whatever it might be to.
Yeah, we have sort of like a roster of sort of creative consultants actually that help us with that sort of thing. The person who is sort of the on staff, so to speak, sort of science consultant of all Star Trek currently is a friend of mine, Dr. Aaron McDonald, who she is an astrophysicist, and she has a doctorate in astrophysics. She did her doctorate on gravitational waves. And so but she's also a huge science fiction fan. She has Voyager tattooed on her arm. And nice. And so she, for most of those questions, like I have a basic understanding of some high level physics. But so like usually we can talk and I'm not totally out of my depth, but if I'm stuck, or sometimes she'll see, every script will go to her and she'll do like a sight pass and like, here's how I would tweak this to make sure that this sort of stuff works. For instance, an interesting thing we realized the other day, like I remember we were talking about the famous Janeway line where she says like, coffee, the finest organic suspension ever devised, right? Or what is it? And it turns out that suspension is actually not the correct term for that. So scientifically speaking, I believe it's something else, like an admixture or something like that. But that's the sort of stuff she catches and tries to fix. She does sometimes ding us on the number of times we use the word quantum, and I'm like, I'm not just throwing it in there. That's Star Trek uses quantum all the time. Quantum timelines, quantum torpedoes,
quantum drive.
And we do. There are things when
quantum entity.
When it comes to the artwork and stuff too, we've got wonderful designers and stuff like that come up with these really imaginative looks for these things, and then we take the artwork and we run it by Dr. Aaron so that she can say, well, I don't think that's necessarily going to have like an energy core coming out of the middle of it, so maybe if you did this instead, and then we'll modify the artwork. We have an episode coming up in the back 10 that has a lot of equations in it. So we went out to Dr. Aaron for all of those equations. It's just stuff like that, just to make sure it's accurate and make sure everything is on the up and up scientifically.
Yeah. And sometimes when we have like a genetic question, that's maybe slightly outside of Dr. Aaron's purview as an astrophysicist, we've brought in other experts as well, like Dr. Mohammed Noor, who I think just got promoted to be interim dean of Duke University, but he's also a very, very nice guy and very knowledgeable about genetics and a huge Star Trek fan. I think he's even written a book called like The Genetics of Star Trek or something to that effect.
Oh, nice.
No, so whenever we were kind of getting into territory of like how genetics work and how epigenetics work and phenotypes and genotypes, he could give us like something that made us sound very smart, like that we can drop that techno babble in.
I do. The one thing I do love about Star Trek, or most of Star Trek, in fact, is the fact that it's that attention to detail in trying to get science as close as possible to what is or could be.
Yeah.
There is also, I mean, this is some fun trivia. We do have a person on staff too that is can construct languages for us if we need to construct languages. So the Valdecott language is a constructed language. It is real. So when you see you know, in the first episode when it reveals that they're on the mining asteroid.
Yeah.
You know, when that Chiron flips, that Valdecott language is real. And then you see the Valdecott language on panels that are in the Rev 12. And so that stuff is real. And also when Gwen sits down with the Cation child and is teaching her language and that kind of floating ring that's floating around them. You know, there are all sorts of languages built into there. There's like Valdecott, there's Klingon, I know for sure. But we put a couple of different languages in there, and they're all pointing to the words that they should be. I mean, so it's that ring of graphics is accurate if somebody wants to go in there and really like get into the language.
I'm sure someone will now.
It'll be the new how-to, won't it? Learn Valdecott.
Yeah. Although if you do now have episodes where there's no UT, universal translator, and they have to sort of say the native languages now, the other voice actor is going to really hate you. We've got to learn this now.
We do have lines. There are like Valdecott lines in there.
Yeah. We also have a Klingon language expert whenever we have Klingon. Like I think Gwen speaks Klingon, we've established. You know, that's one of the thousands of languages that she's spoken. So whenever we have Klingon language come up, we have a Klingon expert. I believe her name is Jen Baum, but she goes by Klingon Pop Warrior because she also has a side business, I suppose, as a music artist, and she records Klingon music.
Cool.
So it's interesting because I think we at one point wanted to use a bit of a Klingon song from TNG, and she came back with like, because she's so tapped into the Klingon language, which has evolved into its own sort of subculture of people, linguists that in their spare time try to make sense of it all. And she's like, oh, well, that one is gibberish, but this one is actually translatable. But if you want, we could try to retcon that language that's from TNG and make it actually kind of make sense in something. And so like, it's amazing. That's the great thing about working in Star Trek is like, there are fans around the world that, do a lot of the hard work for you and either have assembled these things or headcanons or reasoned these out. Or so even if it's like, oh, this is how it always worked in my head, I can then go online and then see that the consensus says, yes, absolutely. And I was like, well, we can't all be wrong, right? and then or sometimes they'll say it works because of in this episode they say this, and I was like, oh, I forgot about that. Perfect. So it's this great, it's a fantastic resource that I think a lot of people ask, isn't it intimidating to work on a franchise that has 50 years of lore and canon? And I'm like, I've been training my whole life for this, man.
I'm the man for the job.
Yeah. There's a lovely sequence in the film Galaxy Quest, if you've seen it, where they actually have to contact the geek on Earth who's the fan of the show, because he's the only one that got the schematics on the stuff. He can direct them around their own ship because they're actors, and you can tell them, you need to go left at the next corridor, because they'd mapped the whole thing out, and the sequence of the doors closing, I thought that was hilarious. I thought that was brilliant. But it's kind of the same.
Played by a young Justin Long, no less.
And the other thing is as well, like they were saying, Star Trek, it guides people into certain careers. So you've got people that will go into astronomy, you've got people that will go into physics, people that will go into learn as a linguist, and that kind of helps for the shows going forward. You're building your pool of experts that come in and help you out as well. Yeah,
and Star Trek fans are so passionate, man. Like, if they're a fantastic resource, and sometimes I'll tweet something and I'll just like I did a tweet thread a year or two ago that was just like, here's a list of all the amazing faster than light technology of warp faster than maximum warp technologies that Voyager brought back. And even then there was like 2 or 3 that fans like, oh, what about this one? What about this one? And I was like, I love you guys. You're my people.
Oh, I love it. We are coming towards the end of our time. There's so much we still haven't talked about, so we may have to just do this again when the next series is out.
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously, we've got you've just said we've got another 10 episodes coming out, which I think we've kind of read sort of towards the
later
end of the
this
year.
Is
that kind of?
Yeah, but I believe we're still, I don't think we've officially announced the date yet, but stay tuned. I imagine that's probably going to come sooner than later. But yeah, later this
by the end of the year is the line that the executives have told us.
Yeah. Hey, we got that right, Dave. We got that right. That's good.
Yeah, and I think we're already greenlit for a second season as well, aren't we?
Yes, and we've
out there.
Yeah, we've written 40 episodes. We've written, and they're all in various stages of production as we speak.
That's nice. Well ahead with it all. Well ahead with it all.
Absolutely. Well, good luck with it all, guys. We will continue to keep watching it on Paramount Plus, of course. Now it's here in the UK. And yeah, I think I've not got anything else. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only other thing that I was going to ask about, just purely for my own interest, is how much involvement did Eugene Roddenberry have at the start when the whole talk of Prodigy started? Did he sort of sit in on meetings or give any pointers from kind of the Roddenberry estate of what they'd like to core values to be kept in the show, or certain direction that they'd like to see it go, or anything like that?
Yeah, well, that was so interesting because Eugene Roddenberry and the folks at I think it's called Roddenberry Productions, obviously they wanted to make sure we got it right, and I was so nervous when we kind of presented what our initial idea for the show was going to be to the powers that be. And I remember they came in and they brought everybody hats, which is awesome. And
nice.
And then I was curious, like, are they just going to be like, this is good, this is bad? But then they said, you nailed it, and they literally said, you've fully embraced and completely hit what I think my dad would be proud of and what he was going for with the series of hope in a hopeless place. And finding strength in the many, striving towards a common goal of exploration and curiosity. Like, this is absolutely the show that I think my dad wished was on the air. And well done. And like, I almost teared up hearing that from them.
You would do with that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, because
wow, what a response.
I'm sort of an Eagle Scout. I'm an A+ student, so like I want everything to be like perfect and not get negative feedback, but I have to always emotionally prepare myself for that. So then when the people that probably know this stuff as best as anyone basically say you're doing a great job, please keep it up, that's about as the best feedback as you can get.
Wow. And the only other thing that I was going to check as well, obviously it was fantastic in the episode with the Kobayashi Maru, where Dal did his captain training and bridge training, and we got some of the legacy characters back. Obviously Odo, who we mentioned earlier, Ahura, Spock, Scotty. I mean, that was just amazing to do that. I think a lot of those were archival audio that you had to work with to get the right lines. And I think the only one that recorded live new recording was Gates McFadden, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah. And that, as Patrick can attest to, that episode was insanely difficult to make. And even on my end, when I was trying to piece it together, we just kind of had this, originally we were going to try to bring in other actors, but, for one reason or another, it couldn't happen. Nichelle Nichols, we wanted to bring in, but then she's not well enough to record. And then, we had written a whole part for Renee Aubergenois, and then unfortunately, like,
he passed,
yeah, just as we were getting ready to kind of get squared away from the beginning, I don't think any of us realized he was that ill. And
no, it was kept very quiet, wasn't it?
He passed away, and it was really devastating. But you know, we kind of picked ourselves back up, and we were like, we have to find like, we can't just take him out of it at this point, because the whole point was to be a good tribute to his character. So I basically at that point doubled down and said, I'll find a way to make it work. And I wound up, I've said elsewhere, like I wound up watching probably 40 or 50 episodes of Star Trek top to bottom, and reading 80 or 90 scripts, and just trying to find lines and dropping them in, experimenting, you know, and then tracking down the lines and giving the time code to the people. And sometimes the line would be good on paper, but then you'd have to go like, oh, actually it doesn't work because he's like walking across a room, or he's rattling the microphones, or he just delivers it weird, or there's a weird edit in the original footage.
Exactly. It's not just finding the line you want, it's finding the line you want with, like you say, the quality to fit it into the show.
Yeah. And you know, in the end, I think we got it mostly there, and we kind of realized that, like, it is a holodeck simulation, so it's okay if it's not perfect. It's a computer just approximating. And also, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world to remind people that these are from real episodes, to encourage them to go out and see these incredible performances.
Watch those,
and have a young kid who maybe is like, who's that guy sitting in, you know, the ops chair, Dad? And then is like, well, that's Odo, and let me pull up some episodes. Like that's my dream, and I've heard from some people that that's been
that's been their sort of line into the older Star Trek, and going back to DS9 and Voyager and TNG and the original series, to see these characters in full as they were.
It's I mean, like we debated it at length too, you know, like we talked about bringing in people to like play, and it didn't seem or feel right to not use the original content of these characters that we were kind of making a tribute for, you know, in their original form in the episode. And we thought that too would be, you know, what plays to the audience and what people would enjoy about it. So
it was a bit of a wow. It was a wow moment. I must admit, I didn't read ahead, so I didn't look at any spoilers. So as I was watching it, and that the episode came up, and then all of a sudden you've got these characters. For me, it was like, oh yes, oh they did that. That's good. I like that.
And that was very much just a moment of discovery when we were breaking the episode too, because it was not, and we didn't go into writing that episode saying, oh, this is going to be the episode where we bring in a bunch of Star Trek cameos. We went in writing like, this is the episode where Dal kind of it has a revelation and sort of a snap to reality when he faces the hardest thing that any cadet can do, which is the Kobayashi Maru test, and what that means for his character. And then when we get, and it was only in the breaking of the episode of like, well, what does the Kobayashi Maru episode like actually look like, you know, in the 24th century? And we realized like, oh, we've never seen that in the age of the holodeck. But then in the original Kobayashi Maru, it wasn't just like instructors, it was the original people who were the bridge crew of the Enterprise. So clearly that's at least some element of like, we're going to give you the best officers possible, and then it's all on you as the would-be captain to navigate through this situation. And so like, I was like, what would that look like in the age of the holodeck? And we were like, well, I suppose, because they can, as we've seen in many episodes, you can literally summon any historical figure and the computer can create an approximation of that. So it would totally make sense if another layer in that age would be like selecting a bridge crew to create that simulacrum of control, so that when the ultimate lesson of a no-win situation hits you, it hits all the harder, because, you know, it wasn't about your bridge crew being, you know, the best of the best. It was all on how you handled a no-win scenario. So
well, like that was like really hard to design. That's one of those 50-50 things that I was talking about at the beginning of this podcast, is like we went into that and, you know, we've never seen like the Enterprise D do the Kobayashi Maru. How much of the original stuff from the Kobayashi Maru do you bring back? Do you work with JJ's version of the Kobayashi Maru? Do you work with, you know, like the original like Wrath of Khan version of like the Kobayashi Maru? You know, and what elements do you borrow, and what things do do you call back to? What do you invent as new? And I think we struck a pretty nice balance, but some of that stuff you just have to take a leap.
Yeah, definitely.
Some of it was pulled from beta canon too, where I was like, this is where how I think it would go. And then I was like, well, isn't there a novel? And I go back and look at the novel, and they wound up doing something very similar, if not identical to what it's like, aha, we can't all be wrong. This must be how it works.
Yeah, amazing.
But I mean, have you got a hit list of kind of legacy characters that you would maybe like to fit into the story somewhere along the line, or maybe Delta Quadrant species we've seen before that could maybe fit into the story going forward?
The answer is yes.
Conversations with
The answer is yes, and you'll have to watch the series to see.
Yeah, I'm not going to say which ones. Tell us all of them.
So we'll start on number one.
No, I like the thing about legacy characters in particular is, we always wanted to make sure that this wasn't just like a cameo for cameo's sake, right?
No.
There always had to be a motivation for the character's journey of our main characters, the Prodigy crew. And so if we did bring in a character, it wouldn't just be to say, like, oh, cool, look, it's Quark. Hey, Quark, and then bye. In CGI in particular, creating an original character model is a very expensive and time-intensive endeavor. It's not about just bringing them in as a day rate to, So, like, usually when we do that, we have it with a very specific intention of like, what does this mean to their character journey? What are they going to glean from this character, this legacy character? And why is the legacy character there? And what does that mean for the greater Star Trek universe in this particular period of the mid 2380s, which, as you've pointed out, is wide open pasture. And as there's a couple of important moments from the movies and Picard, but beyond that, it's about 20 years of who knows what happened in that time. And that's sort of our blank canvas to paint with.
Well, we've got quite a lot more episodes to find out how you do that. And we'll be watching your brush strokes intently, won't we?
Certainly will.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. Everyone can watch, of course, Prodigy on Paramount Plus. First 10 episodes are there now, and they're worth a watch. Absolutely.
Massively worth a watch, aren't they? Is there anything that you guys want to promote in terms of other projects coming up, or causes, charities you're passionate about you'd just like to mention to our audience on here?
I think the big thing is just, for the UK fans listening, just check out Paramount Plus. That's where you'll definitely be able to get all Star Trek sooner than later. And I think it's also airing on Sky, and I think I mean, that's the funny thing about animation is like, sure, we have other projects cooking in the works, but they take years to make. So I would say the big thing is just stay tuned for more news coming at Comic-Con and beyond, and more episodes later this year.
Cool.
Cool. And of course, you can find anything that we post, wherever anything we find out, we'll post as well on our socials, and the links to those can be found at geekyguys.co.uk, along with all our other stuff. Which leave it like
if you want to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, my handle is @GoodAaron, GOODAARON. And
we'll make sure that we are.
I'm just recently on Twitter because I don't use it very often, but I'm trying to follow in Aaron's lead. So I'm @Patrick Krebs on Twitter, and my Instagram is private. So
cool.
There you go.
Lovely. Well, that's it for now. And our regular listeners will be no doubt in the middle of listening to our standard Tea Break podcast series 4 at the minute, Dave, which we've got another episode coming very soon. Hopefully the end of this weekend, actually. So that'll be up and out today or tomorrow. But for now, it's just thank you once again for you coming on, guys, and good luck with the rest of Prodigy, and we'll catch you later.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. It's been brilliant.
Live long and prosper, and peace and long life.
Peace and long life.